The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner. I just looked at him.
"I'll tell you some news," I says. "You'll be astonished to learn that I am interested in the cotton market," I says. "That never occurred to you, did it?"
I did my best to deliver it, he says.
"I tried the store twice and called up your house, but they didn't know where you were," he says, digging in the drawer. "Deliver what?" I says. He handed me a telegram. "What time did this come?" I says.
"About 3:30, he says.
"And now it's 10 minutes past 5, I says.
"I tried to deliver it," he says. "I couldn't find you."
"That's not my fault, is it?" I says.
I opened it, just to see what kind of a lie they'd tell me this time. They must be in one hell of a shape if they've got to come all the way to Mississippi to steal $10 a month. Sell, it says. The market will be unstable with a general downward tendency. Do not be alarmed following government report.
"How much would a message like this cost?" I says. He told me.
"They paid it," he says.
"Then I owe them that much," I says. "I already knew this. Send this collect," I says, taking a blank.
Buy, I wrote. Market just on point of blowing its head off. Occasional flurries for purpose of hooking a few more country suckers who haven't got into the telegraph office yet. Do not be alarmed.
"Send that collect," I says.
He looked at the message, then he looked at the clock. "Market closed an hour ago," he says.
"Well," I says, "that's not my fault either. I didn't invent it. I just bought a little of it while under the impression that the telegraph company would keep me informed as to what it was doing."
"A report is posted whenever it comes in," he says.
"Yes," I says, "and in Memphis they have it on a blackboard every 10 seconds, I says. "I was within 67 miles of there once this afternoon."
He looked at the message. "You want me to send this?" he says.
"I still haven't changed my mind," I says. I wrote the other one out and counted the money. "And this one, too, if you're sure you can spell B-U-Y.
I went back to the store. I could hear the band from down the street. Prohibition's a fine thing. Used to be they'd come in Saturday with just a pair of shoes in the family and him wearing them, and they'd go down to the express office and get his package. Now they all go to the show barefooted, with the merchants in the door like a row of tigers or something in a cage watching them pass. Earl says, "I hope it wasn't anything serious."
"What?"
I says. He looked at his watch. Then he went to the door and looked at the courthouse clock.
"You ought to have a $1 watch," I says. "It won't cost you so much to believe it's lying each time."
"What?"
He says. "Nothing," he says. "I hope I haven't inconvenienced you."
"We were not busy much," he says. "They all went to the show. It's all right."
"If it's not all right," I says, "you know what you can do about it."
"I said it was all right,"
he says. "I heard you," I says, "and if it's not all right, you know what you can do about it."
"Do you want to quit?"
he says. "It's not my business," I says. "My wishes don't matter. But don't get the idea that you're protecting me by keeping me."
"You'd be a good businessman if you'd let yourself, Jason," he says.
"At least I can tend to my own business and let other people's alone," I says.
"I don't know why you are trying to make me fire you," he says. "You know you could quit any time and there won't be any hard feelings between us."
"Maybe that's why I don't quit," I says. "As long as I tend to my job, that's what you are paying me for."
I went on to the back and got a drink of water and went on out the back door. Job had the cultivators all set up at last. Job had the cultivators all set up at last. It was quiet there, and pretty soon my head got a little easier. I could hear them singing now, and then the band played again. Well, let them get every quarter and dime in the county. It was no skin off my back. I've done what I could. A man that can live as long as I have and not know when to quit is a fool, especially as it's no business of mine. If it was my own daughter now, it would be different because she wouldn't have time to. She'd have to work some to feed a few invalids and idiots and ins because how could I have the face to bring anybody there? I've too much respect for anybody to do that. I'm a man. I can stand it. It's my own flesh and blood, and I'd like to see the color of the man's eyes that would speak disrespectful of any woman that was my friend. It's these damn good women that do it. I'd like to see the good church-going woman that's half as square as Lorraine, whore or no whore. Like I say, if I was happy to get married, you'd go up like a balloon and you'd know it. And she says, I want you to be happy and have a family of your own, not to slave your life away for us. But I'll be gone soon, and then you could take a wife, but you'll never find a woman who's worthy of you. And I says, yes, I could. You'd be right out of your grave. You know you would. I says, no thank you. I have all the women I can take care of now. If I married a wife, she'd probably turn out to be a hophead or something. That's all we lack in this family, I says. The sun was down beyond the Methodist church now, and the pigeons were flying back and forth around the steeple, and when the band stopped, I could hear them cooing. It hadn't been 4 months since Christmas, and yet they were almost as thick as ever. I reckon Parson Wathall was getting a bellyful of them now. You'd have thought we were shooting people, with him making speeches and even holding on to a man's gun when they came over. Talking about peace on earth, goodwill toward all, and not a sparrow can fall to earth. But what does he care how thick they get? He hasn't got anything to do. What does he care what time it is? He pays no taxes. He doesn't have to, seeing his money going every year to have the courthouse clock cleaned to where it'll run. They had to pay a man $45 to clean it. I counted over 100 half-hatched pigeons on the ground. You'd think they'd have sense enough to leave town. It's a good thing I don't have any more ties to it than a pigeon, I'll say that. The band was playing again, a loud, fast tune, like they were breaking up. I reckon they'd be satisfied now. Maybe they'd have enough music to entertain them while they drove 14 or 15 miles home and unharnessed in the dark and fed the stock and milked. All they'd have to do would be to whistle the music and tell the jokes to the livestock in the barn, and then they could count up how much they'd made by not taking the stock to the show, too. They could figure that if a man had 5 children and 7 mules, he cleared a quarter by taking his family to the show, just like that. Earl came back with a couple of packages. Here's some more stuff going out, he says. Where's Uncle Joe? Gone to the show, I imagine, I says, unless you watched him. He doesn't slip off, he says. I can depend on him. Meaning me by that? I says. He went to the door and looked out listening. That's a good band, he says. About time they were breaking up, I'd say. Unless they were going to spend the night there, I says. The swallows had begun, and I could hear the sparrows beginning to swarm in the trees in the courthouse yard. Every once in a while, a bunch of them would come swirling around in sight above the roof, then go away. They are as big a nuisance as the pigeons, to my notion. You can't even sit in the courthouse yard for them. First thing you know, bing, right on your head. But it would take a millionaire to afford to shoot them at 5 cents a shot. If they'd just put a little poison out there in the square, they'd get rid of them in a day, because if a merchant can't keep his stock from running around the square, he'd better try to deal in something besides chickens. Something that don't eat, like plows or onions. And if a man don't keep his dogs up, he either don't want it, or he hasn't any business with one. Like I say, if all the businesses in town are run like country businesses, you're going to have a country town. It won't do you any good if they have broke up, I says. They'll have to hitch up and take out to get home by midnight as it is. Well, he says, I enjoy it. Let us spend a little money on a show now and then. The hill farmer works pretty hard and gets mighty little for it. There's no making them farm in the hills, I says. Or anywhere else. Where would you and me be if it wasn't for the farmers? He says. I'd be home right now, I says, lying down with an ice pack on my head. You have those headaches too often, he says. Why don't you have your teeth examined good? Did you go over them all this morning? Did who? I says. Said you went to the dentist this morning. Do you object to me having the headache on your time? I says. Is that it? They were crossing the alley now, coming up from the show. There they come, he says. I reckon I'd better get up front. He went on. It's a curious thing how no matter what's wrong with you, a man will tell you to have your teeth examined and a woman will tell you to get married. It always takes a man that never made much at anything to tell you how to run your business, though. Like these college professors without a whole pair of socks to their name, telling you how to make $1 million in 10 years. And a woman that couldn't even get a husband can always tell you how to raise a family. Old man Job came up with the wagon. After a while, he got through wrapping the lines around the whip socket. Well, I says, was it a good show? I ain't been yet, he says, but I can be arrested in that tent tonight, though. Like hell you haven't, I says. You've been away here since 3 o'clock. Mr. Earl was just back here looking for you. I've been tending to my business, he says. Mr. Earl knows where I've been. You can fool him, I says, but I won't tell on you. Then he's the onlyest man here I try to fool, he says. What I won't waste my time fooling a man where I don't care whether I sees him Saturday night or not. I won't try to fool you, he says. You're too smart for me. Yes, sir, he says, looking busy as hell, putting 5 or 6 little packages into the wagon. You's too smart for me. Ain't a man in this town can keep up with you for his smartness. You fools a man was so smart he can't even keep up with himself, he says, getting in the wagon and unwrapping the reins. Who's that? I says. That's Mr. Jason Compson, he says. Get up now, Dad. One of the wheels was just about to come off. I watched to see if he'd get out of the alley before it did. Just turn any vehicle over to an inn, though. I says that old rattletrap's just an eyesore. You'll keep it standing there in the carriage house 100 years just so that boy can ride to the cemetery once a week. I says he's not the first fellow that'll have to do things he doesn't want to. I'd make him ride in that car like a civilized man or stay at home. What does he know about where he goes and what he goes in and keeping a carriage and a horse so he can take a ride on a Saturday afternoon? A lot Job cared whether the wheel came off or not, long as he wouldn't have to too far to walk back. Like I say, the only place for them is in the field, where they'd have to work from sunup to sundown. They can't stand prosperity or an easy job. Let one stay around white people for a while, and he's not worth killing. They get so they can outguess you about work before your own eyes. Like Roscus, the only mistake he ever made was he got careless one day and died. Shirking and stealing and giving you a little more lip and a little more lip until someday you have to lay them out with a scantling or something. Well, it's Earl's business, but I'd hate to have my business advertised over this town by an old doddering in a wagon that you thought every time it turned around a corner it would come all to pieces. The sun was all high up in the air now, and inside it was beginning to get dark. I went up front. The square was empty. Earl was back closing the safe, and then the clock began to strike. You locked the back door? He says. I went back and locked it and came back. I suppose you're going to the show tonight, he says. I gave you those passes yesterday, didn't I? Yes. I said, you want them back? No, he says. I just forgot whether I gave them to you or not. No sense in wasting them. He locked the door and said good night and went on. The sparrows were still rattling away in the trees, but the square was empty except for a few cars. There was a Ford in front of the drugstore, but I didn't even look at it. I know when I've had enough of anything. I don't mind trying to help her, but I know when I've had enough. I guess I could teach Luster to drive it. Then they could chase her all day long if they wanted to, and I could stay home and play with Ben. I went in and got a couple of cigars. Then I thought I'd have another headache shot for luck, and I stood and talked with them a while. Well, Max says, I reckon you got your money on the Yankees this year. What for? I says, the pennant, he says. Not anything in the league can beat them. Like hell there's not. I says, they're shot. I says, you think a team can be that lucky forever? I don't call it luck, Max says. I wouldn't bet on any team that fellow Ruth played on, I says, even if I knew it was going to win. Yeah? Max says. I can name you a dozen men in either league who are more valuable than he is, I says. What you got against Ruth? Max says. Nothing, I says. I haven't got anything against him. I don't even like to look at his picture. I went on out. The lights were coming on and people going along the streets toward home. Sometimes the sparrows never got still until full dark. The night they turned on the new lights and around the courthouse, it waked them up and they were flying around and blundering into the lights all night long. They kept it up 2 or 3 nights, then one morning they were all gone. Then after about 2 months, they all came back again. I drove on home. There were no lights in this house yet, but they'd all be looking out the windows and Dilsey jawing away in the kitchen like it was her own food she was having to keep hot until I got there. You'd think to hear her that there wasn't but one supper in the world, and that was the one she had to keep back a few minutes on my account. Well, at least I could come home one time without finding Ben in that inn hanging on the gate like a bear and a monkey in the same cage. Just let it come towards sundown, he'd head for that gate like a cow for the barn, hanging on to it and bobbing his head and sort of moaning to himself. That's a hog for punishment for you. If what had happened to him for fooling with open gates had happened to me, I never would want to see another one. I often wonder what he'd been thinking about down there at the gate watching the girls going home for school. Trying to want something he couldn't even remember he didn't and couldn't want any longer. And what he'd think when they'd be undressing him and happen to take a look at himself and begin to cry like he'd do. But like I say, they never did enough of that. I says, I know what you need. You need what they did to Ben, and then you'd behave. And if you don't know what they was, I says, that's Dilsey to tell you. There was a light in Mother's room. I put the car up and went on into the kitchen. Luster and Ben were there. Where's Dilsey? I says. Putting supper on? She upstairs with Miss Caroline, Luster says. They been going here ever since Miss Quentin came home. Mammy up there keeping them fighting. Is that the show come, Mr. Jason? Yes, I said. I thought I heard the band. He says, wish I could go. He says, I could if I just had a quarter. Dilsey came in. You come, is you? She says. What you been up to this evening? You know how much work I got to do with you getting here on time? Maybe I went to the show, I says. Is supper ready? Wish I could go, Luster said. If I could have just had a quarter. You ain't got no business at no show, Dilsey says. You go on into the house and just sit down, she says. Don't you go upstairs and get 'em started again now. What's the matter? I says. Quentin come in a while ago, says you been following her around all evening, and then Miss Caroline jumped on her. Why don't you let her alone? Can't you live in the same house with your own blood niece without quarreling? I can't quarrel with her, he says, because I haven't seen her since this morning. What does she say I've done now? Made her go to school? That's pretty bad, I says. Well, you tend to your business and let her alone, Dilsey says. I'll take care of her before you and Miss Caroline let me. Go on there now, behave yourself till I get supper on. If I just had a quarter, I could go to that show. And if you have wings, you can fly to heaven, Dilsey says. I don't want to hear another word about that show. That reminds me, I says. I've got a couple of tickets they gave me. I took them out of my coat. You fixing to use them? Luster says. Not me, he says. I wouldn't go to it for $10. Give me one of them, Mr. Jason, he says. I'll sell you one, I says. How about it? I ain't got no money, he says. That's too bad, I says. I made to go out. Give me one of them, Mr. Jason, he says. You ain't going to need 'em before. Hush your mouth, Dilsey says. Don't you know he ain't going to give away nothing? How much you want for it? He says. 5 cents, I says. I ain't got that much. How much you got? I says. I ain't got nothing, he says. All right, I says. I went on. Mr. Jason, he says. Why don't you hush up? Dilsey says. He just teasing you. He fixing to use them tickets himself. Go on, Jason. Let him alone. I don't want them, I says. I came back to the stove. I came in here to burn them up. But if you want to buy one for a nickel, I says, looking at him and opening the stove lid. I ain't got that much, he says. All right, I says. I dropped one of them in the stove. You, Jason, Dilsey says. Ain't you ashamed? Mr. Jason, he says. Please, sir. I'll give them tires every day for a month. I need the cash. I says, you can have it for a nickel.
Hush, Luster, Dilsey says. She jerked him back. Go on, she says. Drop it in. Go on, get it over with.
You can have it for a nickel. I says,
go on. Dilsey says, he ain't got no nickel. Go on, drop it in.
All right, I says.
I dropped it in and Dilsey shut the stove. Big grown man like you, she says. Get on out of my kitchen. Hush, she says to Luster. Don't you get Benji started. I'll get you a quarter from Phroney tonight and you can go tomorrow night. Hush up now. I went on to the living room. I couldn't hear anything from upstairs. I opened the paper. After a while, Ben and Luster came in. Ben went to the dark place on the wall where the mirror used to be, rubbing his hands on it and slobbering and moaning. Luster begun punching at the fire.
What are you doing? I says, we don't need any fire tonight.
Well, I'm trying to keep him quiet, says. He had always cold Easter, he says.
Only this is not Easter. I says, let it alone.
He put the poker back and got the cushion out of Mother's chair and gave it to Ben, and he hunkered down in front of the fireplace and got quiet. I read the paper. There hadn't been a sound from upstairs when Dilsey came in and sent Ben and Luster on to the kitchen and said supper was ready.
All right, I says.
She went out. I sat there reading the paper. After a while, I heard Dilsey looking in at the door. Why don't you come on and eat? She says.
I'm waiting for supper. I says.
It's on the table. She says. I done told you.
Is it? I says. Excuse me, I didn't hear anybody come down.
They ain't coming, she said. You come on and eat so I can take something up to them.
Are they sick? I says. What did the doctor say it was? Not smallpox, I hope.
Come on here, Jason, she says, so I can get done.
All right, I says, raising the paper again. I'm waiting for supper now.
I could feel her watching me at the door. I read the paper. What you going to act like this for? She says. Well, you knows how much bother I has anyway.
If Mother is any sicker than she was when she came down to dinner, all right, I says. But as long as I'm buying food for people younger than I am, they'll have to come down to the table to eat it. Let me know when supper's ready, I says, reading the paper again.
I heard her climbing the stairs, dragging her feet, and grunting and groaning like they were straight up and 3 apart. I heard her at Mother's door, and then I heard her calling Quentin, like the door was locked, and then she went back to Mother's room, and then Mother went and talked to Quentin. Then they came downstairs. I read the paper. Dilsey came back to the door. Come on, she says. Before you can think of some more devilment, you're just trying yourself tonight. I went to the dining room. Quentin was sitting with her head bent. She had painted her face again. Her nose looked like a porcelain insulator.
I'm glad you feel well enough to come down, I says to Mother.
It's little enough I could do for you to come to the table, she says. No matter how I feel, I realize that when a man works all day, he likes to be surrounded by his family at the supper table. I want to please you. I only wish you and Quentin got along better. It would be easier for me.
We get along all right, I says. I don't mind her staying locked up in a room all day if she wants to, but I can't have all this whoop-de-doo and sulking at mealtimes. I know that's a lot to ask her, but I'm that way in my own house. Your house, I meant to say.
It's yours, Mother says. You're the head of it now.
Quentin hadn't looked up. I helped the plates, and she begun to eat. Did you get a good piece of meat? I says. If you didn't, I'll try to find you a better one.
She didn't say anything.
I say, did you get a good piece of meat? I says. What? She says. Yeah, it's all right. Will you have some more rice? I says. No, she says. Better let me give you some more, I says. I don't want any more, she says. Not at all, I says. You're welcome.
Is your headache gone?
Mother says. Headache? I says.
I was afraid you were developing one, she says, when you came in this afternoon.
Oh, I says. No, it didn't show up. We stayed so busy this afternoon I forgot about it.
Is that why you were so late? Mother says. I could see Quentin listening. I looked at her. Her knife and fork were still going, but I caught her looking at me. Then she looked at her plate again. I says,
No, I loaned my car to a fellow about 3 o'clock, and I had to wait until he got back with it. I ate for a while. Who was it? Mother says. It was one of those showmen, I says. It seems his sister's husband was out riding with some town woman, and he was chasing them. Quentin sat perfectly still, chewing. You ought not to lend your car to people like that, Mother says. You are too generous with it. That's why I never call on you for it if I can help it. I was beginning to think that myself for a while, I says, but he got back all right. He says he found what he was looking for. Who was the woman? Mother says. I'll tell you later, I says. I don't like to talk about such things before Quentin. Quentin had quit eating. Every once in a while she'd take a drink of water, then she'd sit there crumbling a biscuit up, her face bent over her plate. Yes, Mother says, I suppose women who stay shut up like that, I do have no idea what goes on in this town. Yes, I says, they don't. My life has been so different from that, Mother says. Thank God I don't know about such wickedness. I don't even want to know about it. I'm not like most people. I didn't say any more. Quentin sat there crumbling the biscuit until I quit eating, and then she says, Can I go now? Without looking at anybody. What? I says, Sure you can go. Were you waiting on us? She looked at me. She had crumbled all the biscuit, but her hands still went on like they were crumbling it yet, and her eyes looked like they were cornered or something, and then she started biting her mouth like it ought to have poisoned her with all that red lead. Grandmother, she says, Grandmother. Did you want something else to eat? I says. Why does he treat me like this, Grandmother? She says, I never hurt him. I want you all to get along with one another, Mother says. You're all that's left now, and I do want you all to get along better. It's all his fault. He won't let me alone, and I have to. If he doesn't want me here, why won't he let me go back to... That's enough, I says. Not another word. Then why won't he let me alone? She says. He's the nearest thing to a father you've ever had, Mother says. It's his bread you and I eat. It's only right that he should expect obedience from you. It's his fault, she says. She jumped up. He makes me do it. If he would just... She looked at us, her eyes cornered, kind of jerking her arms against her sides. If I would just what? I says. Whatever I do, it's all your fault, she says. If I'm bad, it's because I had to be. You made me. I wish I was dead. I wish we were all dead. Then she ran. We heard her run up the stairs, then a door slammed. That's the first sensible thing she ever said, I says. She didn't go to school today. How do you know? I says. Were you downtown? I just know, she says. I wish you could be kinder to her. If I did, I'd have to arrange to see her more than once a day, I says. I have to make her come down to the table every meal. Then I could give her an extra piece of meat every time. There are little things you could do, she says. Like not paying any attention when you asked me to see that she goes to school? I says. She didn't go to school today, she says. I just know she didn't. She says she went for a car ride with one of the boys this afternoon, and you followed her. How could I says, when somebody had my car all afternoon? Whether or not she was in school today is already past, I says. If you've got to worry about it, worry about next Monday. I wanted you and she to get along with one another, she says, but she has inherited all the headstrong traits. Quentin's, too. I thought at the time, with the heritage she would already have, to give her that name, too. Sometimes I think she is the judgment of Caddy and Quentin upon me. Good Lord, I says, you've got a fine mind. No wonder you kept yourself sick all the time. What? She says, I don't understand. I hope not. He says, a good woman misses a lot, but she's better off without knowing. They were both that way, she says. They would make interest with your father against me when I tried to correct them. He was always saying they didn't need control and that they already knew what cleanliness and honesty were, which was all that anyone could hope to be taught. Now I hope she's satisfied. You've got Ben to depend on, I says. Cheer up. They deliberately shut me out of their lives, she says. It was always her and Quentin. They were always conspiring against me. Against you too, though you were too young to realize it. They always looked on you and me as outsiders, like they did your Uncle Maury. I always told your father that they were allowed too much freedom, to be together too much. When Quentin started to school, we had to let her go the next year so she could be with him. She couldn't bear for any of you to do anything she couldn't. It was her vanity in her, vanity and false pride. And then when her troubles began, I knew that Quentin would feel that he just had to do something just as bad. But I didn't believe that he would have been so selfish as to... I didn't dream that he...
Maybe he knew it was going to be a girl, I says, and that one more of them would be more than he could stand.
He could have controlled her, she said. He seemed to be the only person she had any consideration for, but that is part of the judgment, too, I suppose.
Yes, I says, too bad it wasn't me instead of him. He'd be a lot better off.
You say things like that to hurt me, she says. I deserve it, though. When they began to sell the land to send Quentin to Harvard, I told your father that he must make an equal provision for you. Then when Herbert offered to take you into the bank, I said, well, Jason's provided for now. And when all the expense began to pile up and I was forced to sell our furniture and the rest of the pasture, I wrote her at once because I said she will realize that she and Quentin have had their share, and part of Jason's too, and that it depends upon her now to compensate him. I said she will do that out of respect for her father. I believed that then. But I'm just a poor old woman. I was raised to believe that people would deny themselves for their own flesh and blood. It's my fault. You have a right to reproach me.
Do you think I need any man's help to stand on my feet? I says, let alone a woman that can't name the father of her own child.
Jason,
she said, all right. I says, I didn't mean that. Of course not.
If I believe that were possible after all my suffering.
Of course it's not, I said. I didn't mean it.
I hope that she at least has spared me, she said.
Sure it is, I says. She's too much like both of them to doubt that.
I couldn't bear that, she says.
Then quit thinking about it, I says. Has she been worrying you any more about getting out at night?
No, I made her realize it was for her own good, and she'd thank me for it some day. She takes her books with her and studies after I lock the door. I see the light on as late as 11 o'clock some nights.
How do you know she's studying? I says.
I don't know what else she'd do in there alone, she says. She never did read any.
No, I says, you wouldn't know. And you can thank your stars for that, I says. Only what would be the use of saying it aloud? It would just have her crying to me again. I heard her go upstairs. Then she called Quentin, and Quentin says, what, through the door.
Good night,
Mother says. Then I heard the key in the lock, and Mother went back to her room. When I finished my cigar and went up, the light was still on. I could see the empty keyhole, but I couldn't hear a sound. She studied quiet. Maybe she learned that in school. I told Mother good night and went to my room to get the box out and counted it again. I could hear the great American gelding snoring away like a planing mill. I read somewhere they'd fix men that give to weigh them women's voices. But maybe he didn't know what they'd done to him. I don't reckon he even knew what he had been trying to do, or why Mr. Burgess knocked him out with the fence picket. And if they'd just sent him on to Jackson while he was under the ether, he'd have never known the difference, but that would have been too simple for a Compson to think of. Not half complex enough. Having to wait to do it until he broke out and tried to run a little girl down on the street with her own father looking at him. Well, like I say, they never started soon enough with their cutting, and they'd quit too quick. I know at least two more that need something like that, and one of them not over a mile away either. But then I don't reckon even that would do any good. Like I say, once a bitch, always a bitch. And just let me have 24 hours without any damn New York Jew to advise me what it's going to do. I don't want to make a killing. Save that to suck to the smart gamblers with. I just want an even chance to get my money back. And once I've done that, they can bring all Beale Street and all Bedlam in here, and two of them can sleep in my bed, and another one can have my place at the table, too. April 8th, 1928. The day dawned bleak and chill.
A moving wall of gray light out of the northeast, which, instead of dissolving into moisture, seemed to disintegrate into minute and venomous particles like dust that, when Dilsey opened the door of the cabin and emerged, needled laterally into her flesh, precipitating not so much a moisture as a substance partaking of the quality of thin, not quite congealed oil. She wore a stiff black straw hat perched upon her turban, and a maroon velvet cape with the border of mangy and anonymous fur above a dress of purple silk, and she stood in the door for a while with her myriad and sunken face lifted to the weather. In one gaunt hand, flax-soled as the belly of a fish, then she moved the cape aside and examined the bosom of her gown. The gown fell gauntly from her shoulders across her fallen breasts, then tightened upon her paunch and fell again, ballooning a little above the nether garments, which she would remove layer by layer as the spring accomplished in the warm days, in color regal and moribund. She had been a big woman once, but now her skeleton rose, draped loosely in unpadded skin that tightened again upon a paunch, almost dropsical, as though muscle and tissue had been courage or fortitude which the days of the years had consumed, until only in the indomitable skeleton was left rising like a ruin or a landmark above the somnolent and impervious guts, and above that collapsed face that gave the impression of the bones themselves being outside the flesh, lifted into the driving day with an expression at once fatalistic and of a child's astonished disappointment, until she turned and entered the house again and closed the door. The earth immediately about the door was bare. It had a patina as though from the soles of bare feet in generations, like old silver or the walls of Mexican houses which had been plastered by hand. Beside the house, shading it in summer, stood 3 mulberry trees, the fledged leaves that would later be broad and placid as the palms of hands streaming flatly undulant upon the driving air. A pair of jaybirds came up from nowhere, whirled up on the blast like gaudy scraps of cloth or paper, and lodged in the mulberries, where they swung in raucous tilt and recover, screaming into the wind that ripped their harsh cries onward and away like scraps of paper or of cloth in turn. Then 3 more joined them, and they swung and tilted in their wrung branches for a time, screaming. The door of the cabin opened, and Dilsey emerged once more, this time in a man's felt hat and an army overcoat, beneath the frayed skirts of which her blue gingham dress fell in uneven balloonings, streaming too about her as she crossed the yard and mounted the steps to the kitchen door. A moment later she emerged, carrying an open umbrella now, which she slanted ahead into the wind, and crossed to the woodpile and laid the umbrella down, still open. Immediately she caught at it and rested it, and held on to it for a while, looking about her. Then she closed it, laid it down, and stacked stovewood into her crooked arm against her breast, and picked up the umbrella and got it open at last, and returned to the steps and held the wood precariously balanced while she contrived to close the umbrella, which she propped into the corner just within the door. She dumped the wood into the box behind the stove. Then she removed the overcoat and hat and took a soiled apron down from the wall and put it on and built a fire in the stove. While she was doing so, rattling the grate bars and clattering the lids, Mrs. Compson began to call her from the head of the stairs. She wore a dressing gown of quilted black satin, holding it close under her chin. In the other hand she held a red rubber hot water bottle, and she stood at the back of the stairway calling Dilsey at steady and inflectionless intervals, and into the quiet stairwell that descended into complete darkness, then opened again, where a gray window fell across it. Dilsey, she called, without inflection or emphasis or haste, as though she were not listening for a reply at all. Dilsey. Dilsey answered and ceased clattering the stove, but before she could cross the kitchen, Mrs. Compson called her again, and before she crossed the dining room and brought her head into relief against the gray splash of the window, still again. "All right," Dilsey said. "All right, here I is. I'll feel it soon as I get some hot water." She gazed up her skirts and mounted the stairs, wholly blotting the gray light. "Put it down, darling, and gone back to bed." "I don't understand what was the matter," Mrs. Compson said. "I've been lying awake for an hour at least, without hearing a sound from the kitchen." "You put it down and gone back to bed," Dilsey said. She toiled painfully up the steps, shapeless, breathing heavily. I'll have the fire going in a minute, and the hot water hot in 2 more. I've been lying there for an hour at least, Mrs. Compson said. I thought maybe you were waiting for me to come down and start the fire. Dilsey reached the top of the stairs and took the water bottle. I'll fix it in a minute, she said. Lost overstepped this morning and up half the night at that show. I'll go and build the fire myself. Gone now, so you won't wake the others till we are ready. If you permit Luster to do things that interfere with his work, you'll have to suffer for it yourself, Mrs. Compson said. Jason won't like it if he hears about it. You know he won't. 'Twan't none of Jason's money, he went on. Dilsey said, that's one thing, sure. She went on down the steps. Mrs. Compson returned to her room. As she got into bed again, she could hear Dilsey yet descending the stairs with a sort of painful and terrific slowness that would have become maddening had it not presently ceased beyond the flapping diminishment of the pantry door. She entered the kitchen, built up a fire, and began to prepare breakfast. In the midst of this, she ceased and went to the window and looked out toward her cabin. Then she went to the door and opened it and shouted into the driving weather. Luster! She shouted, standing to listen, tilting her face from the wind. You, Luster! She listened. Then, as she prepared to shout again, Luster appeared around the corner for the kitchen. Man, he said innocently, so innocently that Dilsey looked down at him for a moment, motionless, with something more than mere surprise. Where you at? She said. Nowhere, he said. Just in the cellar. What you doing in the cellar? She said. Don't stand out in the rain, fool. She said, ain't doing nothing, he said. He came down the steps. Don't you dare come in this door without an armful of wood, she said. Here I done had to tote your wood and build your fire before. Didn't I tell you not to leave this place last night before that wood box was full to the top? I did, Luster said. I filled it. Where it gone to then? I don't know. I ain't touched it. Well, you get hit full up now, she said. Get on then to see about Benji. She shut the door. Luster went to the woodpile. The 5 jaybirds whirled over the house, screaming, and into the mulberries again. He watched them. He picked up a rock and threw it. Whew, he said. Get back to hell where you belong. 'Tain't Monday yet. He loaded himself mountainously with stove wood. He could not see over it, and he staggered to the steps and up them and blundered crashing against the door, shed in billets. Then Dilsey came and opened the door for him, and he blundered across the kitchen. You Luster, she shouted, but he had already hurled the wood into the box with a thunderous crash. Ha! He said. Is you trying to wake up the whole house? Dilsey said. She hit him on the back of the head with the flat of her hand. Go on up there and get Benji dressed now. Yes'm, he said. He went toward the outer door. Where are you going? Dilsey said. I thought I'd better go round the house on by the front, so I don't wake up Miss Caroline on them. You go on him to back stairs like I told you and get Benji's clothes on him, Dilsey said. Go on now. Yes'm, Luster said. He returned and left by the dining room. After a while it ceased to flap. Dilsey prepared to make biscuit. As she ground the sifter steadily above the breadboard, she sang, to herself at first, something without particular tune or words, repetitive, mournful, and plaintive, austere, as she ground a faint, steady snowing of flour onto the breadboard. The stove had begun to heat the room and to fill it with murmurous minors of the fire, and presently she was singing louder, as if her voice, too, had been thawed out by the growing warmth. And then Mrs. Compson called her name again from within the house. Dilsey raised her face as if her eyes could and did penetrate the walls and ceiling, and saw the old woman in her quilted dressing gown at the head of the stairs calling her name with machine-like regularity. Oh, Lord, Dilsey said. She set the sifter down and swept up the hem of her apron and wiped her hands and caught up the bottle from the chair on which she had laid it and gathered her apron about the handle of the kettle, which was now jetting faintly. Just a minute, she called. This water just got minute hot. It was not the bottle, which Mrs. Compson wanted, however, and clutching it by the neck like a dead hen, Dilsey went to the foot of the stairs and looked upward. Ain't Luster up there with him? She said.
Luster hasn't been in the house. I've been lying here listening for him. I knew it would be late, but I did hope he'd come in time to keep Benjamin from disturbing Jason on Jason's one day of the week to sleep in the morning. I don't see how you expect anybody to sleep with you standing in the hall hollering at folks phone at the crack of dawn, Dilsey said. She began to mount the stairs, toiling heavily. I sent that boy up there half an hour ago. Mrs. Compson watched, holding her dressing gown under her chin. What are you going to do? She said. Go and get Benji dressed up and get him down to the kitchen where he won't wake Jason and Quinn, Dilsey said. Have you started breakfast yet? I'll tend to that too, Dilsey said. You better get back there in bed, 12, with us to make your fire. It's cold this morning. I know it, Mrs. Compson said. My feet are like ice. They were so cold they wake me up. She watched Dilsey mount the stairs. It took her a long while. You know how it frets Jason when breakfast is late, Mrs. Compson said. I can't do but one thing at a time, Dilsey said. Get on back to bed, for you has my hands this morning, too. If you're going to drop everything to dress Benjamin, I'd better come down and get breakfast. You know as well as I do how Jason acts when it's late. And who gonna eat your messing? Dilsey said. Tell me that. Go on now, she said, toiling upward. Mrs. Compson stood watching her as she mounted, steadying herself against the wall with one hand, holding her skirts up with the other. Are you going to wake him up just to dress him? She said. Dilsey stopped. With her foot lifted to the next step, she stood there, her hand against the wall, and a gray splash of the window behind her, motionless and shapeless, she loomed. He ain't waked then? She said. He wasn't when I looked in, Mrs. Compson said, but it's past his time. He never does sleep after 7:30. You know he doesn't. Dilsey said nothing. She made no further move. But though she could not see her save as a blobby shape without depth, Mrs. Compson knew that she had lowered her face a little and that she now stood like a cow in the rain as she held the empty water bottle by its neck. You're not the one who has to bear it, Mrs. Compson said. It's not your responsibility. You can go away. You don't have to bear the brunt of it day in and day out. You owe nothing to them, to Mr. Compson's memory. I know you have never had any tenderness for Jason. You've never tried to conceal it. Dilsey said nothing. She turned slowly and descended, lowering her body from step to step as a small child does, her hand against the wall. You go and let him alone, she said. Don't go in there no more. I'll settle us up as soon as I find it. Leave him alone now. She returned to the kitchen. She looked into the stove, then she drew her apron over her head and donned the overcoat, and opened the outer door and looked up and down the yard. The weather drove upon her flesh, harsh and minute, but the scene was empty of all else that moved. She descended the steps gingerly, as if for silence, and went around the corner of the kitchen. As she did so, Luster emerged quickly and innocently from the cellar door. Dilsey stopped. What you up to? She said. Nothing, Luster said. Mr. Jason said for me to find out where that water leak in the cellar from. And when has said to you for to do that? Dilsey said. Last New Year's Day, wasn't it? I thought I'd just be looking whilst they sleep, Luster said. Dilsey went to the cellar door. He stood aside and she peered down into the obscurity, odorous of dank earth and mold and rubber. Huh, Dilsey said. She looked at Luster again. He met her gaze blandly, innocent and open. I don't know what you up to, but you ain't got no business doing it. You just trying me to this morning because others is, ain't you? You get on up there to see the Benji, you hear? Yes'm, Luster said. He went on toward the kitchen steps swiftly. Here, Dilsey said. You give me another armful of wood while I got you. Yes'm, he said. He passed her on the steps and went to the woodpile. When he blundered again at the door a moment later, again invisible and blind within and beyond his wooden avatar, Dilsey opened the door, guided him across the kitchen with a firm hand. Just throw it at the box again, she said. Just throw it. I got to, Luster said, panting. I can't put it down no other way. Then you stand there and hold it a while, Dilsey said. She unloaded him a stick at a time. What got you in this morning? Here I sent you for the wood. You ain't never brought more than 6 sticks at a time to save your life to today. What you fixin' to ask me, kin, for you do now? Ain't that show left the town yet? Yes'm, it's that gone. She put the last stick into the box. Now you going up dog with Benji like I told you before, she said. And I don't tell nobody else nothing yelling down them stairs and me twirl I rings the bell. You hear me? Yes'm, Luster said. He vanished through the swing door. Dilsey put some more wood in the stove and returned to the breadboard. Presently she began to sing again. The room grew warmer. Soon Dilsey's skin had taken on a rich, lustrous quality, as compared with that as the faint dusting of wood ashes which both it and Luster's had worn. As she moved about the kitchen, gathering about her the raw materials of wood, coordinating the meal. On the wall above a cupboard, invisible save at night, by lamplight, and even then evincing an enigmatic profundity because it had but one hand, a cabinet clock ticked. Then with a preliminary sound as if it had cleared its throat, struck 5 times. 8 o'clock, Dilsey said. She ceased and tilted her head upward, listening, but there was no sound save the clock and the fire. She opened the oven and looked at the pan of bread, then stooping, she paused while someone descended the stairs. She heard the feet cross the dining room, then the swing door opened and Luster entered, followed by a big man who appeared to have been shaped of some substance whose particles would not or did not cohere to one another or to the frame which supported it. His skin was dead-looking and hairless. Dropsical, too. He moved with a shambling gait like a trained bear. His hair was pale and fine. It had been brushed smoothly down upon his brow like that of a children in daguerreotypes. His eyes were clear, of the pale, sweet blue of cornflowers. His thick mouth hung open, drooling a little. Is it cold? Dilsey said. She wiped her hands on her apron and touched his hand. If you ain't, I is, Luster said. Always cold Easter. Ain't never seen it fail. Miss Caroline say if you got time to fix a hot water bottle, to never mind about it. Oh, Lord, Dilsey said. She drew a chair into the corner between the wood box and the stove. The man went obediently and sat in it. Look at the dining room, see where I laid that bottle down, Dilsey said. Luster fetched the bottle from the dining room, and Dilsey filled it and gave it to him. Hurry up now, she said. See if Jake's awake now. Tell me it's all ready. Luster went out. Ben sat beside the stove. He sat loosely, utterly motionless save for his head, which made a continual bobbing sort of movement as he watched Dilsey with his sweet, vague gaze as she moved about. Luster returned. Here, he said. Miss Caroline said put that on the table. Came to the stove and spread his hands palm down on the firebox. He up too, he said. Went hit with both their feet this morning. What's the matter now? Dilsey said. Get away from there. How can I do anything with you standing over the stove? I cold, Luster said. You ought to thought about that while you was down in that cellar, Dilsey said. What the matter with Jason? Saying me and Benji broke that winder in his room. Is there one broke? Dilsey said. That's what he's saying, Luster said. Say I broke it. How could you, when he keep it locked up all day and night? Say I broke it chunking rocks at it, Luster said. And did you? No, Luster said. Don't lie to me, boy, Dilsey said. I never done it, Luster said. Ask Benji if I did. I ain't stood in that winder. Who could have broke it then? Dilsey said. He's just trying himself. Wake Quentin up, she said, taking the pan of biscuits out of the stove. Reckon so, Luster said. These is funny folks. Glad I ain't none of 'em. Ain't none of who? Dilsey said. Let me tell you something then, boy. You got just as much constant devilment in you as any of 'em. Is you right sure you never broke that window? What I want to break it for? What you do any of your devilment for? Dilsey said. Wash him now, so he can't burn his hand again till I get at the table set. She went to the dining room where they heard her moving about. Then she returned and set a plate at the kitchen table and set food there.
Ben watched her slobbering, making a faint, eager sound. All right, honey, she said. Here your breakfast. Bring his chair, Luster. Luster moved the chair up, and Ben sat down, whimpering and slobbering. Dilsey tied a cloth about his neck and wiped his mouth at the end of it. And see, can you keep from messing up his clothes one time? She said, handing Luster a spoon. Ben ceased whimpering. He watched the spoon as it rose to his mouth. It was as if even eagerness were muscle-bound in him, too, and hunger itself inarticulate, not knowing it is hunger. Luster fed him with skill and detachment. Now and then his attention would turn long enough to enable him to feint the spoon and cause Ben to close his mouth upon the open air, but it was apparent that Luster's mind was elsewhere. His other hand lay on the back of the chair, and upon that dead surface it moved tentatively, delicately, as if he were picking an inaudible tune out of the dead void. And once he even forgot to tease Ben with the spoon while his fingers tossed out of the slain wood a soundless and involved arpeggio until Ben recalled him by whimpering again. In the dining room, Dilsey moved back and forth. Presently she rang a clear, small bell. Then in the kitchen, Luster heard Mrs. Compson and Jason descending, and Jason's voice as he rolled his eyes whitely with listening. Sure, I know they didn't break it. Jason said, sure, I know that. Maybe the change of weather broke it. I don't see how it could have, Mrs. Compson said. Your room stays locked all day long, just as you leave it when you go to town. None of us would ever go in there except Sunday to clean it. I don't want you to think that I will go where I'm not wanted or that I will permit someone else to. I never said you broke it, did I? Jason said. I don't want to go in your room, Mrs. Compson said. I respect anybody's private affairs. I wouldn't put my foot over the threshold even if I had a key. Yes, Jason said. I know your keys won't fit. That's why I had the lock changed. What I want to know is how that window got broken. Luster said he didn't do it, Dilsey said. I knew that without asking him, Jason said. Where's Quentin? He said. Where she is every Sunday morning, Dilsey said. What got into you last few days anyhow? Well, we're all going to change all that, Jason said. Go up and tell her breakfast is ready. You leave her alone now, Jason, Dilsey said. She gets up for breakfast every week morning, and Caroline lets her stay in bed every Sunday. You knows that. I can't keep a kitchen full of inns to wait on her pleasure much as I'd like to, Jason said. Go and tell her to come down to breakfast. Ain't nobody have to wait on her, Dilsey said. I put her breakfast in the warmer and she... Did you hear me? Jason said. I hears you, Dilsey said. All I've been hearing when you in the house. If it ain't Quentin, it's your ma's, hits Luster and Benji, what you let him go on that way for, Miss Caroline. You better do as he says, Mrs. Compson said. He's head of the house now. It's his right to require us to respect his wishes. I try to do it, and if I can, you can too. Ain't no sense in him being so bad-tempered he got to make Quentin get up just to suit him, Dilsey said. Maybe you think she broke that window. She would if she happened to think of it, Jason said. You go and do what I told you. And I wouldn't blame her none if she did, Dilsey said, going towards the bed. You nagging at her all the blessed time and you in the house. Hush, Dilsey, Mrs. Compson said. It's neither your place nor mine to tell Jason what to do. Sometimes I think he is wrong, but I try to obey his wishes for you all's sake. If I'm strong enough to come to the table, Quentin can too. Dilsey went out. They heard her mounting the stairs. They heard her a long while on the stairs. You've got a prize set of servants, Jason said. He helped his mother and himself to food. Did you ever have one that was worth killing? You must have had some before I was big enough to remember. I have to humor them, Mrs. Compson said. I have to depend on them so completely. It's not as if I was strong. I wish I were. I wish I could do all the housework myself. I could at least take that much off your shoulders. And a fine pigsty we'd live in, too, Jason said. Hurry up, Dilsey, he shouted. I know you blame me, Mr. Compson said, for letting him off to go to church today. Go where? Jason said. Hasn't that damn show left yet? To church, Mrs. Compson said. The darkies are having a special Easter service. I promised Dilsey 2 weeks ago that they could get off. Which means we'll eat a cold dinner, Jason said, or none at all. I know it's my fault, Mrs. Thompson said. I know you blame me. For what? Jason said. You never resurrected Christ, did you? They heard Dilsey mount the final stair and then her slow feet overhead. Quinn, she said when she called. The first time Jason laid his knife and fork down and he and his mother appeared to wait across the table from one another in identical attitudes. The one cold and shrewd, with close thatched brown hair curled into two stubborn hooks, one on either side of his forehead like a bartender in caricature, and hazel eyes with black ringed irises like marbles, the other cold and querulous, with perfectly white hair and eyes pouched and baffled and so dark as to appear to be all pupil or all irises. Quinn, Dilsey said, get up, honey. They're waiting breakfast on you. I can't understand how that window got broken, Miss Comp said. Are you sure it was done yesterday? It could have been like a long time with the warm weather. The upper sash behind the shade like that. I've told you for the last time that it happened yesterday, Jason said. Don't you reckon I know the room I live in? Do you reckon I could have lived in it a week with a hole in the window you could stick your hand... His voice ceased, ebbed, left him staring at his mother with eyes that for an instant were quite empty of anything. It was as though his eyes were holding their breath while his mother looked at him, her face flaccid and querulous, interminable, clairvoyant yet obtuse. As they sat, so Dilsey said, Quinn, don't play with me, honey. Come on to breakfast, honey. They waiting for you. I can't understand it, Mrs. Compson said. It's just as if someone had tried to break into the house. Jason sprang up. His chair crashed over backward. What? Mrs. Compson said, staring at him as he ran past her and went jumping up the stairs where he met Dilsey. His face was now in shadow, and Dilsey said, She's sullen. Your ma ain't a lot. But Jason ran past her along the corridor to her door. He didn't call. He grasped the knob and tried it. Then he stood with the knob in his hand, and his head bent a little, as if he were listening to something much further away than the dimensioned room behind the door, and which he already heard. His attitude was that of one who goes through the motions of listening in order to deceive himself as to what he already hears. Behind him, Mrs. Compson mounted the stairs, calling his name. Then she saw Dilsey, and she quit calling him and began to call Dilsey instead. I told you she ain't unlocked that door yet, Dilsey said. When she spoke, he turned and ran toward her, but his voice was quiet, matter-of-fact. She carry the key with her? He said. Has she got it now, I mean, or will she have... Dilsey, Mrs. Compson said on the stairs. In which? Dilsey said. Why don't you let... The key, Jason said, to that room. Does she carry it with her all the time, Mother? Then he saw Mrs. Compson, and he went down the stairs and met her. Give me the key, he said. He fell to pawing at the pockets of the rusty black dressing sack she wore. She resisted. Jason, she said, Jason, are you and Dilsey trying to put me to bed again? She said, trying to fit him up. Can't you even let me have Sunday in peace? The key, Jason said, pawing at her. Give it here. He looked back at the door as if he were expected it to fly open before he could get back to the key with it, yet he did not have. You, Dilsey, Mrs. Compson said, clutching her sack about her. Give me the key, you old fool! Jason cried suddenly. From her pocket he tugged a huge bunch of rusted keys from an iron ring like a medieval jailer's and ran back up the hall with the two women behind him. You, Jason, Mrs. Compson said. He'll never find the right one, she said. You know I never let anyone take my keys, Dilsey, she said. She began to wail. Hush, Dilsey said. He ain't going to do nothing to her. I ain't going to let him. But on Sunday morning, in my own house, Mrs. Compson said, when I tried so hard in raising Christians, let me find the right key, Jason, she said. She put her hand on his arm. Then she began to struggle with him, but he flung her aside with the motion of his elbow and looked around at her a moment, his eyes cold and harried. Then he turned to the door again at the unwieldy keys. Hush, Dilsey said. You, Jason! Something terrible has happened, Mrs. Compson said, wailing again.
I know it has. You, Jason, she said, grasping at him again. He won't even let me find the key to a room in my own house. Now, Dizzy said. What can happen? All right here. I ain't gonna let him hurt her. Quinn, she said, raising her voice. Don't you be scared, honey. I sit right here. The door opened, swung inward. He stood in it for a moment, hiding the room. Then he stepped aside. Go in, he said in a thick, light voice. They went in. It was not a girl's room. It was not anybody's room. And the faint scent of cheap cosmetics and the few feminine objects and the other evidences of crude and hopeless efforts to feminize it but added to its anonymity, giving it that dead and stereotyped transience of rooms in assignation houses. The bed had not been disturbed. On the floor lay a soiled undergarment of cheap silk, a little too pink. From a half-open bureau drawer dangled a single stocking. The window was open. A pear tree grew there, close against the house. It was in bloom, and the branches scraped and rasped against the house, and the myriad air driving in the window brought into the room the forlorn scent of the blossoms. Donna, Dilly said, then I'll tell you she all right. All right, Mrs. Compton said. Dilsey followed her into the room and touched her. You go on lay down now, she said. I'll find it 10 minutes. Mrs. Compton shook her off. Find the note, she said. Quentin left a note when he did it. All right, Tilly said. I'll find it. You come on to your room now. I knew the minute they named her Quentin this would happen, Mrs. Compton said. She went to the bureau and began to turn over the scattered objects there, scent bottles, a box of powder, a chewed pencil, a pair of scissors with one broken blade lying upon a darned scarf dusted with powder and stained with rouge. Find the note, she said. I is, Dizzy said. You come on now. Me and Jason will find it. You come on to your room. Jason, Mrs. Compton said. Where is he? She went to the door. Dilsey followed her on down the hall to another door. It was closed. Jason, she called through the door. There was no answer. She tried the knob, then she called him again, but there was still no answer, for he was hurling things backward out of the closet, garments, shoes, a suitcase. Then he emerged carrying a sawn section of tongue and groove planking and laid it down and entered the closet again and emerged with a metal box. He set it on the bed and stood looking at the broken lock while he dug a key ring from his pocket and selected a key. And for a time longer he stood with the selected key in his hand, looking at the broken lock. Then he put the keys back in his pocket and carefully tilted the contents of the box out upon the bed. Still carefully he sorted the papers, taking them up one at a time and shaking them. Then he upended the box and shook it too, and slowly replaced the papers and stood again, looking at the broken lock with the box in his hands and his head bent. Outside the window he heard some jaybirds swirl, shrieking past and away, their cries whipping along the wind, and an automobile passed somewhere and died away also. His mother spoke his name again beyond the door, but he didn't move. He heard Dilsey lead her away up the hall, then a door closed. Then he replaced the box in the closet and flung the garments back into it, went downstairs to the telephone. While he stood there with the receiver to his ear waiting, Dilsey came down the stairs. She looked at him without stopping and went on. The wire opened. This is Jason Compton, he said, his voice so harsh and thick that he had to repeat himself. Jason Compton, he said, controlling his voice. Have a car ready with a deputy if you can't go in 10 minutes. I'll be there. What? Robbery. My house. I know who it... Robbery, I say. Have a car ready... What? Aren't you a paid law enforcement? Yes, I'll be there in 5 minutes. Have that car ready to leave at once. If you don't, I'll report it to the governor. He clapped the receiver back across the dining room where the scarce broken meal now lay cold on the table and entered the kitchen. Dilsey was filling the hot water bottle. Ben sat tranquil and empty. Beside him, Luster looked like a feist dog, brightly watchful.
He was eating something. Jason went on across the kitchen. Ain't you gonna eat no breakfast? Dilsey said. He paid her no attention. Go on and eat your breakfast, Jason. He went out. The outer door banged behind him. Luster rose and went to the window and looked out. Ooh, he said. What happening up there? He been beating Miss Quinn? You hush your mouth, Dilsey said. You get Benji started now. I'll beat your head off. You keep him quiet as you can till I get back now. She screwed the cap on the bottle and went out. They heard her go up the stairs. Then they heard Jason pass the house in his car. Then there was no sound in the kitchen save the simmering murmur of the kettle and the clock. You know what I'll bet? Lusher said. I'll bet he beat her. I bet he knock her in the head and now he going for the doctor. That's what I bet. The clock tick-tocked, solemn and profound. It might have been the dry pulse of the decaying house itself. After a while it whirred and cleared its throat and struck 6 times. Ben looked up at it. Then he looked at the bullet-like silhouette of Luster's head in the window, and he begun to bob his head again, drooling. He whimpered. Hush up, loony, Luster said without turning. Look like we ain't gonna get to no church today. But Ben sat in the chair, his big soft hands dangling between his knees, moaning faintly. Suddenly he wept, a slow, bellowing sound, meaningless and sustained. Hush, Luster said. He turned and lifted his hand. You want me to whoop you? But Ben looked at it, bellowing slowly with each expiration. Luster came and shook him. You hush this minute, he said. Here, he said. He hauled Ben out of the chair and dragged the chair around facing the stove and opened the door to the firebox and shoved Ben into the chair. They looked like a tug nudging at a clumsy tanker in a narrow dock. Benzie sat down again, facing the rosy door. He hushed. Then they heard the clock again and Dilsey slow on the stairs. When she entered, he begun to whimper again, and then he lifted his voice. What you done to him? Dilsey said. Why can't you let him alone this morning of all times? I ain't done nothing to him, Luster said. Miss Jason scared him. That's what it is. You ain't killed Miss Quinn, is he? Hush, Benji, Dilsey said. He hushed. She went to the window and looked out. Is it quit raining? She said. Yes'm, Luster said. Quit a long time ago. Then y'all go out to do a while, she said. I just got Miss Caroline quiet now. Is we going to church? Luster said. I'll let you know about that when the time comes. You keep away from this house till I calls you. Can we go to the pastor? Luster said. All right. Only you keep away from the house. I done stood all I can. Yes'm, Luster said. Where Miss Jason gone, mammy? That's some more of your business, ain't it? Dilsey said. She began to clear the table. Hush, Benji. Luster gonna take you out to play. What he done to Miss Quinn, mammy? Luster said. Ain't done nothing to her. Y'all get on out of here. I bet she ain't here, Luster said. Dilsey looked at him. How you know she ain't here? Me and Benji seen her climb out the window last night, didn't us, Benji? You did? Dilsey said, looking at him. We sees her do it every night, Luster said. Climb right down that pear tree. Don't you lie to me, boy, Dilsey said. I ain't lying. Ask Benji if I is. Why don't you say something about it then? 'Twa'n't none of my business, Luster said. I ain't going to get mixed up in white folk business. Come on here, Benji. Let's go outdoors. They went out. Dilsey stood for a while at the table. Then she went and cleared the breakfast things from the dining room and ate her breakfast and cleaned up the kitchen. Then she removed her apron and hung it up and went to the foot of the stairs and listened for a moment. There was no sound. She donned the overcoat and the hat and went across to her cabin. The rain had stopped. The air now drove out of the southeast, broken overhead into blue patches. Upon the crest of a hill beyond the trees and roofs and spires of town, sunlight lay like a pale scrap of cloth, was blotted away. Upon the air a bell came, then, as if at a signal, other bells took up the sound and repeated it. The cabin door opened and Dilsey emerged, again in the maroon cape and the purple gown and wearing soiled white elbow-length gloves and minus her headcloth now. She came into the yard and called Luster. She waited a while, then she went to the house and around it to the cellar door, moving close to the wall, and looked into the door. Ben sat on the steps. Before him, Luster squatted on the damp floor. He held a saw in his left hand. The blade sprung a little by pressure on his hand, and he was in the act of striking the blade with the worn wooden mallet with which she had been making beaten biscuit for more than 30 years. The saw gave forth a single sluggish twang that ceased with lifeless alacrity, leaving the blade in a thin, clean curve between Luster's hand and the floor. Still inscrutable, it bellied. "That's the way he done hit," Luster said. "I just ain't found the right thing to hit it with." "That's what you doing, is it?" Dilsey said. "Bring me the mallet," she said. "I ain't heard it," Luster said. "Bring it here," Dilsey said. "Put that saw where you got it first." He put the saw away and brought the mallet to her. Then Ben wailed again, hopeless and prolonged. It was nothing, just sound. It might have been all time and injustice and sorrow become vocal for an instant by a conjunction of planets. "Listen at him," Luster said. "He ain't went on that every way since you sauntered us out of the house. I don't know what got into him this morning." "Bring him here," Dilsey said. "Come on, Benji," Luster said. He went back down the steps and took Benji's arm. He came obediently, wailing. That slow, hoarse sound that ships make, that seems to begin before the sound itself has started, seems to cease before the sound itself has stopped. "Run and get a cat," Dilsey said. "Don't make no noise, Miss Caroline can hear. Hurry now, we already late." "She gonna hear him anyhow if you don't stop him," Luster said. "He stop when we get off the place," Dilsey said. "He's smelling it. That's what it is." "Smell what, mammy?" Luster said. "You go get the cat," Dilsey said. Luster went on. They stood in the cellar door, Ben one step below her. The sky was broken now into scudding patches and that dragged their swift shadows up out of the shabby garden, over the broken fence and across the yard. Dilsey stroked Ben's head slowly and steadily, something the bang upon his brow. He wailed quietly, unhurriedly. "Hush," Dilsey said. "Hush now. We'll be gone in a minute. Hush now." He wailed quietly and steadily. Luster returned, wearing a stiff new straw hat with a colored band and carrying a cloth cap. The hat seemed to isolate Luster's skull in the beholder's eye as a spotlight would, in all its individual planes and angles. So peculiarly individual was its shape that at first glance the hat appeared to be on the head of someone standing immediately behind Luster. Dilsey looked at the hat. "Why don't you wear your old hat?" she said. "Couldn't find it," Luster said. "I bet you couldn't. I bet you fixed it last night so you couldn't find it. You fixing to ruin that one." "Aw, mammy," Luster said. "It ain't gonna rain." "How you know? You go get that old hat and put this new one away." "Aw, mammy." "Then you go get the umbrella." "Aw, mammy." "Take your choice," Dilsey said. "Get your old hat or the umbrella. I don't care which." Luster went to the cabin. Ben wailed quietly. "Come on," Dilsey said. "They can catch up with us. We going to hear the singing." They went around the house toward the gate. "Hush," Dilsey said from time to time as they went down the drive. They reached the gate. Dilsey opened it. Luster was coming down the drive behind him, carrying the umbrella. A woman was with him. "Here they come," Dilsey said. They passed out the gate. "Now then," she said. Ben ceased. Luster and his mother overtook them. Phroney wore a dress of bright blue silk and a flowered hat. She was a thin woman with a flat, pleasant face. "You got 6 weeks' work right there on your back," Dilsey said. "What you going to do if it rain?" Get wet, I reckon," Phroney said. "I ain't never stopped no rain yet." "Mammy always talking about it going rain," Luster said. "If I don't worry about y'all, I don't know who is," Dilsey said. "Come on, we already late."
Reverend Shigall going to preach today, Phroney said. Is? Dilsey said. Who him? He from St. Louis, Phroney said. That big preacher. Huh, Dilsey said. Who they needs is a man can put the fear of God in this here trifling young ends. Reverend Shigall going to preach today, Phroney said. So they tells. They went on along the street. Along its quiet length, white people in bright clumps moved to Churchwood under the windy bells, walking now and then in the random and tentative sun. The wind was gusty out of the southeast, chill and raw after the warm days. I wish you wouldn't keep on bringing them to church, Mammy, Phroney said. Folks talking. What folks? Dilsey said. I hears them, Phroney said. And I don't know I knows what kind of folks, Dilsey said. Trash white folks. That's who it is. Thinks he ain't good enough for a white church, but in church ain't good enough for him. They talks just the same, Phroney said. Then you send 'em to me, Dilsey said. Tell him the good Lord don't care where he's smart or not. Don't nobody white trash to care to hear that. A street turned oil at right angles, descending, and became a dirt road. On either hand, the land dropped more sharply, a broad flat dotted with small cabins whose weathered roofs were on a level with the crown of the road. They were set in small grassless plots, littered with broken things, bricks, planks, crockery, things of a once utilitarian value. What growth there was consisted of rank weeds, and the trees were mulberries and locusts and sycamores, trees that partook also of the foul desiccation which surrounded the house, trees whose very burgeoning seemed to be sad in the stubborn remnant of September, even if this spring had passed them by, leaving them to feed upon the rich and unmistakable smell of Negroes in which they grew. From the doors, Negroes spoke to them as they passed, to Dilsey usually. Sis Gibson, how are you this morning? I'm well. Is you well? I'm right well, I thank you. They emerged from the cabins and struggled up the shading levee to the roadmen in staid, hard brown or black with gold watch chains and now and then a stick. Young men in cheap violent blues or stripes and swaggering hats. Women a little stiffly sibilant, and children in garments brought second hand of white people who looked at Ben with this covertness of nocturnal animals. I bet you won't go on and take him. How come I won't? I bet you won't. I bet you scared to. He won't hurt folks. He just a loony. How come a loony won't hurt folks? That don't won't. I touched him. I bet you won't now. Case Miss Dilsey looking. You won't no ways. He don't hurt folks. He just a loony. And steadily the older people speaking to Dilsey, though, unless they were quite old, Dilsey permitted Phroney to respond. Mammy ain't feeling well this morning. That's too bad, but Reverend Shigall will cure that. He'll give her the comfort and the unburdening. The road rose again to a scene like a painted backdrop, notched into a cut of red clay crowned with oaks. The road appeared to stop short off, like a cut ribbon. Beside it, a weathered church lifted its crazy steeple like a painted church, and the whole scene was as flat and without perspective as a painted cardboard set upon the ultimate edge of the flat earth, against the windy sunlight of space, and April in a mid-morning filled with bells. Toward the church they thronged with slow Sabbath deliberation. The women and children went on in, and the men stopped outside and talked in quiet groups until the bell ceased ringing. Then they too entered. The church had been decorated with sparse flowers from kitchen gardens and hedgerows, and with streamers of colored crepe paper. Above the pulpit hung a battered Christmas bell, the accordion sort that collapses. The pulpit was empty, though the choir was already in place, fanning themselves, although it was not warm. Most of the women were gathered on one side of the room. They were talking. Then the bell struck one time, and they dispersed to their seat, and the congregation sat for an instant, expectant. The bell struck again one time. The choir rose and began to sing, and the congregation turned its head as one, as 6 small children, 4 girls, with tight pigtails bound with small scraps of cloth like butterflies, and 2 boys with close-napped heads, entered and marched up the aisle, strung together in a harness of white ribbons and flowers, and followed by 2 men in a single file.
The second man was huge, of a light coffee color, imposing in a frock coat and white tie. His head was magisterial and profound. His neck rolled above his collar in rich folds. But he was familiar to them, and so the heads were still reverted when he had passed, and it was not until the choir ceased singing that they realized that the visiting clergyman had already entered. And when they saw the man who had preceded their minister enter the pulpit still ahead of him, an indescribable sound went up, a sound of astonishment and disappointment. The visitor was undersized, in a shabby alpaca coat. He had a wizened black face like a small-aged monkey, and all the while that the choir sang again, and all the while the 6 children rose and sang in thin, frightened, tuneless whispers, they watched the insignificant-looking man sitting dwarfed and countrified by the minister's imposing bulk with something like consternation. They were still looking at him with consternation and unbelief when the minister rose and introduced him in a rich, rolling tones whose very unction served to increase the visitor's insignificance. "And they brung that all the way from St. Louis," Phony whispered. "I know the Lord did use cruiser tools in that," Dilsey said. "Hush now," she said too. "They fixin' to sing again in a minute." When the visitor rose to speak, he sounded like a white man. His voice was level and cold. It sounded too big to have come from him, and they listened at first through curiosity, as they would have to a monkey talking. They began to watch him as they would a man on a tightrope. They even forgot his insignificant appearance and the virtuosity with which he ran and poised and swooped upon the cold, inflectionless wire of his voice, so that at last, when, with sort of swooping glide, he came to rest again beside the reading desk with one arm resting upon it at shoulder height, and his monkey body as reft of all motion as a mummy or an emptied vessel. The congregation sighed as if it had waked from a collective dream and moved a little in its seats. Behind the pulpit, the choir fanned steadily. Dilsey whispered, "Hush now, they fixin' to sing in a minute." Then a voice said, "Brethren." The preacher had not moved. His arm lay yet across the desk, and he still held that pose while the voice died in sonorous echoes between the walls. It was as different as day and dark from his former tone, with a sad, timbrous quality like an alto horn, sinking into their hearts and speaking there again when it had ceased and fading in cumulate echoes. "Brethren and sistren," it said again. The preacher removed his arm, and he began to walk back and forth before the desk, his hands clasped behind him, a meager figure, hunched over upon itself like that of one long immured and striving with the implacable earth. "I got the recollection and the blood of the Lamb." He tramped steadily back and forth between the twisted paper and the Christmas bell, hunched, his hands clasped behind him. He was like a worn small rock whelmed by the successive waves of his voice. With his body he seemed to feed the voice that, succubus-like, had fleshed its teeth into him. And the congregation seemed to watch with its own eyes while the voice consumed him until he was nothing, and they were nothing, and there was not even a voice, but inside their hearts were speaking to one another in chanting measures beyond the need for words, so that when he came to rest against the reading desk, his monkey face lifted and his whole attitude that of a serene, tortured crucifix that transcended its shabbiness and insignificance and made it of no moment. A long, moaning expulsion of breath rose from them, and a woman's single soprano, "Yes, Jesus!" As the scudding day passed overhead, the dingy windows glowed and faded in ghostly retrograde. A car passed along the road outside, laboring in the sand, died away. Dilsey sat bolt upright, her hand on Ben's knee. 2 tears slid down her fallen cheeks, in and out of the myriad coruscations of immolation and abnegation and time. "Brethren," the minister said in a harsh whisper without moving. "Yes, Jesus," the woman's voice said, hushed yet. "Brethren, yes, sistern." His voice rang again with the horns. He removed his arm and stood erect and raised his hands. "I got the recollection in the blood of the Lamb. They did not mark just when his intonation, his pronunciation became negroid. They just sat swaying a little in their seats, and the voice took them into itself. When the long cold, oh, I tells you, brethren, when the long cold, I sees the light and I sees the word, poor sinner. They passed away in Egypt, the swinging chariots, the generations passed away. Was a rich man, where he now, O brethren? Was a poor man, where he now, O sister? Oh, I tells you, if you ain't got the milking to do with the old salvation when the long cold years roll away. Yes, Jesus. I tells you, brethren, and I tells you, sister, there'll come a time. Poor sinner saying, let me lay down with the Lord. Let me lay down my load. Then what Jesus going to say, oh brethren, oh sister, is you got the recollection in the blood of the Lamb? Case I ain't when low down heaven. He fumbled in his coat and took out a handkerchief and mopped his face. A low, concerted voice sound rose from the congregation. The woman's voice said, yes, Jesus, Jesus. Brethren, look at them little children sitting there. Jesus was like that once. His mammy suffered the glory and the pangs. Sometimes maybe she held him in the nightfall whilst the angels singing him back to sleep. Maybe she look out their door in the Roman police passing. He tramped back and forth, mopping his face. Listen, brethren, I sees the day. May setting in their door with Jesus on her lap, the little Jesus. Like them children there, their little Jesus. I hear the angels singing the peaceful songs in the glory. I see the closing eyes. Sees Mary jump up, sees the soldier face. We gwine to kill, we gwine to kill. We gon' to quill your little Jesus. I hears the weeping and the lamentation of the poor mammy without the salvation and the word of God. Jesus, little Jesus. And another voice rising, I see, oh Jesus, oh I sees. And still another without words, like bubbles rising in water. I sees it, brethren, I sees it. Sees the blast and blind in sight. I sees Calvary with the sacred tree. Sees the thief and the murderer and the least of these. I hear the boasting and the bragging. If you be Jesus, lift up your tree and walk. I hears the wailing of women in the evening lamentations. I hears the weeping and the crying and the turned away face of God. They done killed Jesus. They done killed my son. Jesus, I see, oh Jesus. Oh blind sinner, brethren, I tells you, sister, I says to you, when the Lord did turn his mighty face, say, ain't went over Lord Tevin. I can't see the widowed God shut his door. I sees the whelming flood roll between. I sees the darkness and the death everlasting upon the generations. Then, lo, brethren, yes, brethren, what I see, O sinner, I sees the resurrection in the light, seeks to meet Jesus, saying, they killed me, that ye shall live again. I died, that them what sees and believes shall never die. Brethren, O brethren, I sees the doom cracking, hears the golden horn shouting down the glory, in the rising dead what got the blood in the recollection of the Lamb. In the midst of the voices and the hands, Ben sat, wrapped in his sweet blue gaze. Dilsey sat bolt upright beside, crying rigidly and quietly in the annealment in the blood of the remembered Lamb. As they walked through the bright noon, up the sandy road with the dispersing congregation, talking easily again, group to group, she continued to weep, unmindful of the talk. He sure a preacher, Ma. He didn't look like much at first, but hush. He seed the power and the glory. Yes, sir, he seed it. Face to face, he seed it. Dilsey made no sound. Her face did not quiver as the tears took their sunken and devious courses, walking with her head up, making no effort to dry them away even. "Why don't you quit that, Mammy?" Phony said. "With all these people looking, we be passing white folks soon." "I seed the first and the last," Dilsey said. "Never you mind me." "First and last what?" Phony said. "Never you mind," Dilsey said. "I seed the beginning. Now's I see the ending." Before they reached the street, though, she stopped and lifted her skirt and dried her eyes in the hem of her topmost underskirt. Then they went on. Ben shambled along beside Dilsey, watching Luster, who anticked along ahead, the umbrella in his hand and his new straw hat slanted viciously in the sunlight, like a big wolfish dog watching a small, clever one. They reached the gate and emerged. Immediately, Ben began to whimper again, and for a while all of them looked up the drive at the square, paintless house with its rotten portico. "What's going up there, Day-Day?" Phony said. "Something is." "Nothing," Dill said. "You tend your business and let the white folks tend to theirs." "Something is," Phony said. "I heard it first thing this morning. 'Tain't none of my business, though." "And I knows what, too," Luster said. "You knows more than you got any use for," Dill said. "Ain't you just heard Phony say it ain't none of your business? You take Benji on the back and keep quiet while I put dinner on." "I knows what Miss Quentin is," Luster said. "Did just keep it," Dill said. "Soon as Quentin need any of your advice, I'll let you know. Y'all go and play in the back now." "You know what's going to happen soon as they start playing that ball over yonder," Luster said. "They won't stop for a while yet. By that time, TP be here to take him riding. Here, you give me that new hat." Luster gave her the hat, and he and Ben went across to the backyard. Ben was still whimpering, though not loud. Dilsey and Phony went to the cabin. After a while, Dilsey emerged, again in the faded calico dress, and went to the kitchen. The fire had died down. There was no sound in the house. She put on the apron and went upstairs. There was no sound anywhere. Quentin's room was as they had left it. She entered and picked up the undergarment, put the stocking back in the drawer, and closed it. Mrs. Compson's door was closed. Dilsey stood beside it for a moment, listening. Then she opened it and entered a pervading reek of camphor. The shades were drawn, the room in half-light, and the bed, so that at first she thought Mrs. Compson was asleep and was about to close the door when the other spoke. "Well," she said, "what is it?" "It's me," Diz said. "You want anything?" Mrs. Compson didn't answer. After a while, without moving her head at all, she said, "Where's Jason?" "He ain't come back yet," Diz said. "What you want?" Mrs. Compson said nothing, like so many cold, weak people when faced at last by the incontrovertible disaster. She assumed from something a sort of fortitude, strength. In her case, it was unshakable conviction regarding the yet unplumbed event. "Well," she said presently, "did you find it?" "Find what? What you talking about?" "The note. At least she would have had enough consideration to leave a note. Even Quentin did that." "What you talking about?" Diz said. "Don't you know she all right? I bet she'd be walking right in this door before dark." "Fiddlesticks," Mrs. Constance said. "It's in the blood. Like uncle, like niece, or mother. I don't know which would be worse. I don't seem to care." "What you keep on talking that way for?" Dilsey said. "What she want to do anything like that for?" "I don't know. What reason did Quinn have? Under God's heaven, what reason did he have? It can't be simply to flout and hurt me. Whoever God is, he would not permit that. I'm a lady. You might not believe that from my offspring, but I am." "You just wait and see," Dilsey said. "She be here by night, right there in her bed." Mrs. Compson said nothing. The camphor-soaked cloth lay upon her brow. The black robe lay across the foot of the bed. Dilsey stood with her hand on the doorknob. "Well," Mrs. Compson said, "what do you want?" Are you going to fix some dinner for Jason and Benjamin or not? Jason ain't come yet, Dilly said. I'll go and fix something. You sure you don't want none? Your bar's still hot enough? You might hand me my Bible. I'll give it to you this morning before I left. You laid it on the edge of the bed. How long you expected to stay there? Dilsey crossed to the bed and groped among the shadows beneath the edge of it and found the Bible face down. She smoothed the bent pages and laid the book on the bed again. Mrs. Compson didn't open her eyes. Her hair and the pillow were the same color. Beneath the wimple of the medicated cloth, she looked like an old nun praying. Don't put it there again, she said without opening her eyes. That's where you put it before. You want me to have to get it out of the bed to pick it up? Dilsey reached the book across her and laid it on the broad side of the bed. You can't see to read nowadays, she said. You want me to raise the shade a little? No. Let them alone. Go on, fix Jason something to eat. Dilsey went out. She closed the door and returned to the kitchen. The stove was almost cold. When she stood there, the clock above the cupboard struck 10 times. 1 o'clock, she said aloud. Jason ain't coming home. Is he the first and the last, she said, looking at the stove, cold. I see the first and the last. She set out some cold food on the table. As she moved back and forth, she sang a hymn. She sang the first 2 lines over and over to complete tune. She arranged the meal and went to the door and called Luster, and after a time, Luster and Ben entered. Ben was still moaning a little as to himself. He ain't never quit, Luster said. Y'all come and eat, Dilly said. Jason ain't coming to dinner. They sat down at the table. Ben could manage solid food pretty well for himself, though even now, with cold food before him, Dilsey tied a cloth about his neck. He and Luster ate. Dilsey moved about the kitchen, singing 2 lines of the hymn which she remembered. Y'all quit going on eat, she said. Jason ain't coming home. He was 20 miles away at that time. When he left the house, he drove rapidly to town, overreaching the slow Sabbath groups and the peremptory bells along the broken air. He crossed the empty square and turned into a narrow street that was abruptly quieter even yet, and stopped before a frame house and went up the flower-bordered walk to the porch. Beyond the screen door, people were talking. As he lifted his hand to knock, he heard steps, so he withheld his hand until a big man in black broadcloth trousers and a stiff bosomed white shirt without collar opened the door. He had vigorous, untidy iron gray hair, and his gray eyes were round and shiny like a little boy's. He took Jason's hand and drew him into the house, still shaking it. Come right in. Come right in. You ready to go now? Jason said. Walk right in, the other said, propelling him by the elbow into a room where a man and woman sat. You know Myrtle's husband, don't you? Jason Compson, Vernon. Yes, Jason said. He did not even look at the man, and as the sheriff drew a chair across the room, the man said, We'll go out so you can talk. Come on, Myrtle. No, Sheriff said. You folks keep your seat. I reckon it ain't that serious. Jason, have a seat. I'll tell you as we go along, Jason said. Get your hat and coat. We'll go out. Keep your seat, Sheriff said. Me and Jason will go out on the porch. You get your hat and coat, Jason said. They've already got a 12-hour start. The sheriff led the way back to the porch. A man and a woman passing spoke to him. He responded with a hearty, florid gesture. Bells were still ringing from the direction of the section known as Inn Hollow. Get your hat, Sheriff, Jason said. Sheriff drew up 2 chairs. Have a seat. Tell me what the trouble is. I told you over the phone, Jason said, standing. I did that to save time. Am I going to have to go to law to compel you to do your sworn duty? You sit down and tell me about it, Sheriff said. I'll take care of you all right. Care hell, Jason said. Is this what you call taking care of me?
You're the one that's holding us up, Sheriff said. You sit down. Tell me about it.
Jason told him, his sense of injury and impotence feeding upon its own sound, so that after a time he forgot his haste in the violent accumulation of his self-justification and his outrage. The sheriff watched him steadily with his cold, shiny eyes.
But you don't know they done it, he said. You just think so.
Don't know, Jason said. When I spent 2 damn days chasing her through alleys trying to keep her away from him, after I told her what I'd do to her if I ever caught her with him, and now you say I don't know that little bit...
Now then, the sheriff said. That'll do. That's enough of that.
He looked out across the street, his hands in his pockets. And that's when I come to you, a commissioned officer of the law, Jason said.
That shows in Motsum this week, Sheriff said.
Yes, Jason said. And if I could find a law officer that gave a solitary damn about protecting the people that elected him to office, I'd be there too by now. He repeated his story, harshly, recapitulant, seeming to get an actual pleasure out of his outrage and impotence. The sheriff did not appear to be listening at all.
Jason, he said, what were you doing with $3,000 hid in your house?
What? Jason said. That's my business where I keep my money. Your business is to help me get it back.
Did your mother know you had that much on the place?
Look here, Jason said. My house has been robbed. I know who did it, and I know where they are. I come to you as the commissioned officer of the law, and I ask you once more, are you going to make any effort to recover my property or not?
What do you aim to do with that girl, if you catch him?
Nothing, Jason said. Not anything. I wouldn't lay my hand on her. That bitch that cost me a job, the one that I ever had to get ahead, that killed my father and is shorting my mother's life every day and made my name a laughing stock in the town, I won't do anything to her, he said. Not anything.
You drove that girl into running off, Jason, the sheriff said.
How I conduct my family is no business of yours, Jason said. Are you going to help me or not?
You drove her away from home, the sheriff said, and I have some suspicions about who that money belongs to that I don't reckon I'll ever know for certain.
Jason stood, slowly wringing the brim of his hat in his hands. He said quietly, You're not going to make any effort to catch them for me?
That's not any of my business, Jason. If you had any actual proof, I'd have to act. But without that, I don't figure it's any of my business.
That's your answer, is it? Jason said. Think well now.
That's it, Jason.
All right, Jason said. He put his hat on. You'll regret this. I won't be helpless. This is not Russia, where just because he wears a little metal badge, a man is immune to law. He went down the steps and got into his car and started the engine. Sheriff watched him drive away, turn, and rush past the house toward town. The bells were ringing again, hiding in a scuttling sunlight and bright, disorderly tatters of sound. He stopped at a filling station and had his tires examined and the tank filled.
Going on a trip, is it?
The Negro asked him. He didn't answer.
Looked like it went fair off after all, the Negro said.
Fair off hell, Jason said. It'll be raining like hell by 12 o'clock. He looked at the sky, thinking about rain, about the slick clay roads, himself stalled somewhere miles from town. He thought about it with the sort of triumph of the fact that he was going to miss dinner, that by starting now and so serving his compulsion of haste, he would be at the greatest possible distance from both towns when noon came. It seemed to him that in this circumstance was giving him a break. So he said to the Negro, "The hell are you doing? Somebody paid you to keep this car standing here as long as you can?"
"This here ain't got no air at all in it,"
Negro said. "Then get the hell away from there and let me have that tube," Jason said.
"Get up now," Negro said, rising. "You can ride now."
Jason got in and started the engine and drove off. He went into second gear, the engine spluttering and gasping, and he raced to the engine, jamming the throttle down and snapping the choker in and out savagely. "It's gonna rain," he said. "Get me halfway there and rain like hell." And he drove on out of the bells and out of town, thinking of himself slogging through the mud hunting a team. "And every damn one of them will be at church." He thought of how he'd find a church at last and take a team, and of the owner coming out shouting at him, and of himself striking the man down. "I'm Jason Compson. See if you can stop me. See if you can elect a man to office that can stop me," he said, thinking of himself entering the courthouse with a file of soldiers and dragging the sheriff out. "Thinks he can sit with his hands folded and see me lose my job? I'll show him about jobs." Of his niece he did not think at all, nor of the arbitrary valuation of the money. Neither of them had had entity or individuality for him for 10 years. Together, they merely symbolized the job in the bank of which he had been deprived before he ever got it. The air brightened. The running shadow patches were not the obverse, and it seemed to him that the fact that the day was clearing was another cunning stroke on the part of the foe, the fresh battle towards which he was carrying ancient wounds. From time to time he passed churches, unpainted frame buildings with sheet iron steeples surrounded by tethered teams and shabby motor cars, and it seemed to him that each of them was a picket post where the rear guards of circumstance peeped fleetingly back at him. "And damn you, too," he said. "See if you can stop me." Thinking of himself, his file of soldiers with the manacled sheriff in the rear, dragging omnipotence down from his throne if necessary, of the embattled legions of both hell and heaven through which he tore his way and put his hands at last on his fleeing niece. The wind was out of the southeast. It blew steadily upon his cheek. It seemed that he could feel the prolonged blow of it sinking through his skull, and suddenly, with an old premonition, he clapped the brakes on and stopped and sat perfectly still. Then he lifted his hand to his neck and began to curse, and sat there, cursing in a harsh whisper. When it was necessary for him to drive for any length of time, he fortified himself with a handkerchief soaked in camphor, which he would tie about his throat when clear of town, thus inhaling the fumes. And he got out and lifted the seat cushion on the chance that there might be a forgotten one there. He looked beneath both seats and stood again for a while, cursing, seeing himself mocked by his own triumphing. He closed his eyes, leaning on the door. He could return and get the forgotten camphor, or he could go on. In either case, his head would be splitting, but at home, he could be sure of finding camphor on Sunday, while if he went on, he could not be sure. But if he went back, he would be an hour and a half later in reaching Matson. "Maybe I can drive slow," he said. "Maybe I can drive slow, thinking of something else." He got in and started. "I'll think of something else," he said. So he thought about Lorraine. He imagined himself in bed with her, only he was just lying beside her, pleading with her to help him. And then he thought of the money again, and that he had been outwitted by a woman. A girl. If he could just believe it was the man who had robbed him, but to have been robbed of that which was to have compensated him for the lost job, but to have which he had acquired through so much effort and risk by the very symbol of the lost job itself, and worst of all, by a bitch of a girl. He drove on, shielding his face from the steady wind with the corner of his hat. He could see the opposed forces of his destiny and his will driving swiftly together now, toward a junction that would be irrevocable. He became cunning. "I can't make a blunder," he told himself. There would be just one right thing, without alternatives. He must do that. He believed that both of them would know him on sight, while he'd have to trust to seeing her first, unless the man still wore the red tie. And the fact that he must depend on that red tie seemed to be the sum of the impending disaster. He could almost smell it, feel it above the throbbing of his head. He crested the final hill. Smoke lay in the valley and roofs, a spire or two above trees. He drove down the hill and into town slowly. telling himself again of the need for caution to find where the tent was located first. He could not see very well now, and he knew that it was the disaster which kept telling him to go directly and get something for his head. At a filling station, they told him that the tent was not up yet, but that the show cars were on a siding at the station. He drove there. Two gaudily painted Pullman cars stood on the track. He reconnoitered before he got out. He was trying to breathe shallowly so that the blood would not beat so in his skull. He got out and went along the station wall watching the cars. A few garments hung out the windows, limp and crinked, as though they had been recently laundered. On the earth beside the steps of one sat 3 canvas chairs, but he saw no sign of life at all until a man in a dirty apron came to the door and emptied a pan of dishwater with a broad gesture, the sunlight glinting on the metal belly of the pan, then entered the car again. Now I'll have to take him by surprise before he can warn them, he thought. It never occurred to him that they might not be there, in the car. That they should not be there. That the whole result should not hinge on whether he saw them first or they saw him first, would be opposed to all nature and contrary to the whole rhythm of events. And more than that, he must see them first, get the money back, then what they did would be of no importance to him. While otherwise the whole world would know that he, Jason Compson, had been robbed by Quentin, his niece, a bitch. He reconnoitered again. Then he went to the car and mounted the steps swiftly and quietly and paused at the door. The galley was dark, rank with stale food. The man was a white blur singing in a cackled, shaky tenor. An old man, he thought, and not as big as I am. He entered the car as the man looked up. "Hey," the man said, stopping his song. "Where are they?" Jason said. "Quick now, in the sleeping car?" "Where's who?" The man said. "Don't lie to me," Jason said. He blundered on in the cluttered obscurity. "What's that?" the other said. "Who you calling a liar?" And when Jason grasped his shoulder, he exclaimed, "Look out, fella!" "Don't lie," Jason said. "Where are they?" "Why, you bastard," the man said. His arm was frail and thin in Jason's grasp. He tried to wrench free. Then he turned and fell to scrabbling on the littered table behind him. "Come on," Jason said. "Where are they?" "I'll tell you where they are," the man shrieked. "Let me find my butcher knife." "Here," Jason said, trying to hold the other. "I'm just asking you a question." "You bastard!" the other shrieked, scrabbling at the table. Jason tried to grasp him in both arms, trying to prison the puny fury of him. The man's body felt so old, so frail, yet so fatally single-purposed that for the first time Jason saw clear and unshadowed the disaster toward which he rushed. "Quit it," he said. Here, I'll get out. Give me time, I'll get out." "Call me a liar," the other wailed. Let me go just 1 minute, I'll show you." Jason glared wildly about, holding the other. Outside it was now bright and sunny, swift and bright and empty, and he thought of the people soon to be going quietly home to Sunday dinner, decorously festive, and of himself trying to hold the fatal, furious little old man whom he dared not release long enough to turn his back and run. "Will you quit long enough for me to get out?" he said. "Will you?" But the other still struggled. Jason freed one hand and struck him on the head. A clumsy, hurried blow, and not hard, but the other slumped immediately and slid clattering among pans and buckets to the floor. Jason stood above him, panting, listening. Then he turned and ran from the car. At the door he restrained himself and descended more slowly and stood there again. His breath made a ha-ha-ha sound as he stood there trying to repress it. Darting his gaze this way and that, when at a scuffling sound behind him he turned in time to see the little old man leaping awkwardly and furiously from the vestibule, a rusty hatchet high in his hand. He grasped at the hatchet, feeling no shock but knowing that he was falling, thinking, so this is how it'll end. And he believed that he was about to die when something crashed against the back of his head. He thought, how did he hit me there? Only maybe he hit me a long time ago, he thought. And I just now felt it. And he thought, hurry. Get it over with. And then a furious desire not to die seized him, and he struggled, hearing the old man wailing and cursing in his cracked voice. He still struggled when they hauled him to his feet, but they held him and he ceased. "Am I bleeding much?" he said. "The back of my head. Am I bleeding?" He was still saying that while he felt himself being propelled rapidly away, hearing the old man's thin, furious voice dying away behind him. "Look at my head," he said. "Wait, Wait, hell," the man who held him said. "That damn little wasp will kill you. Keep going. You ain't hurt." "He hit me," Jason said. "Am I bleeding?" "Keep going," the other said. He led Jason on around the corner of the station to the empty platform where an express truck stood, where grass grew rigidly in a plot bordered with rigid flowers and a sign and electric lights. "Keep your eye on Matson," the gap filled by a human eye with an electric pupil. The man released him. "Now," he said, "you get on out of here and stay out. What are you trying to do? Commit suicide?" "I was looking for two people," Jason said. "I just asked him where they were." "Who are you looking for?" "It's a girl," Jason said, "and a man. He had on a red tie in Jefferson yesterday with this show. They robbed me."
"Oh," the man said. "You're the one, are you? Well, they ain't here."
"I reckon so," Jason said. He leaned against the wall and put his hand on the back of his head and looked at his palm. "I thought I was bleeding," he said. "I thought he hit me with that hatchet."
"You hit your head on the rail," the man said. "You better go on. They ain't here."
"Yes, he said they were not here. I thought he was lying."
"You think I'm lying?"
the man said. "No," Jason said. "I know they're not here."
"I told them to get the hell out of here, both of them," the man said. "I won't have nothing like that in my show. I run a respectable show with a respectable troupe."
"Yes," Jason said. "You don't know where they went?"
"Nah, and I don't want to know. No member of my show could pull a stunt like that. You her brother?"
"No," Jason said. "It don't matter. I just wanted to see them. You sure he didn't hit me? No blood, I mean?"
"There would have been blood if I hadn't got there when you did. You stay away from here now. That little bastard will kill you. That's your car yonder?"
"Yes."
"Well, you get in it. Go back to Jefferson. If you find them, it won't be in my show. I run a respectable show."
"You say they robbed you?"
"No."
Jason said. "It don't make any difference." He went to the car and got in. What is it I must do, he thought. Then he remembered. He started the engine and drove slowly up the street until he found a drugstore. The door was locked. He stood for a while with his hand on the knob and his head bent a little. Then he turned away when a man came along after a while. He asked if there was a drugstore open anywhere, but there was not. Then he asked where the northbound train came, and the man told him at 2:30. He crossed the pavement and got in the car again and sat there. After a while, two Negro lads passed. He called to them. "Can either of you boys drive a car?"
"Yes, sir."
"What do you charge to drive me to Jefferson right away?" They looked at one another, murmuring. "I'll pay $1, Jason said. They murmured again.
"Couldn't go for that,"
one said. "What will you go for?"
"Can you go?"
one said. "I can't get off," the other said. "Why don't you drive him up there? You ain't got nothing to do."
"Yes, I is."
"What you gotta do?" They murmured again, laughing. "I'll give you $2, Jason said. "Either of you."
"I can't get away neither."
"All right," Jason said. "Go on." He sat there for some time. He heard a clock strike the half hour. Then people began to pass in Sunday and Easter clothes. Some looked at him as they passed, as the man sitting quietly behind the wheel of a small car, with his invisible life raveled out about him like a worn-out sock. After a while, a Negro in overalls came up.
"You the one want to go to Jefferson?"
he said. "Yes," Jason said. "What do you charge me?"
$4.
"Give you 2.
"Can't go for no less than 4.
Man in the car sat quietly. Wasn't even looking at him. The Negro said,
"You want me? or not?
All right, Jason said. Get in. He moved over and the Negro took the wheel. Jason closed his eyes. I can get something for it at Jefferson, he told himself, easing himself to the jolting. I can get something there. They drove on along the streets where people were turning peacefully into houses and Sunday dinners and on out of town. He thought that. He wasn't thinking of home where Ben and Luster were eating cold dinner at the kitchen table. Something, the absence of disaster, threat, and any constant evil, permitted him to forget Jefferson as any place which he had ever seen before, where his life must resume itself. When Ben and Luster were done, Dilsey sent them outdoors. And so you can keep letting him alone 4 o'clock. TP be here then. Yes'm, Luster said. They went out. Dilsey ate her dinner and cleared up the kitchen. Then she went to the foot of the stairs and listened, but there was no sound. She returned through the kitchen and out the outer doors and stopped on the steps. Ben and Luster were not in sight, but while she stood there, she heard another sluggish twang from the direction of the cellar door, and she went to the door and looked down upon the repetition of the morning scene. He done it just that way, Luster said. He contemplated the motionless saw with a kind of hopeful dejection. I ain't got the right to this thing hit it with it yet, he said. And you ain't gonna find a hit down there either, Dilsey said. You take him out in the sun. You both get pneumonia down there on this wet floor. She waited and watched him cross the yard toward a clump of cedar trees near the fence. Then she went on to her cabin. Now, don't you get started, Luster said. I had enough trouble with you today. There was a hammock made of barrel staves slatted into woven wires. Luster laid down in the swing, but Ben went on vaguely and purposely. He began to whimper again. Hush now, Luster said. I'm fixing to whoop you. He lay back in the swing. Ben had stopped moving, but Luster could hear him whimpering. Is you going to hush or ain't you? Luster said. He got up and followed and came upon Ben squatting before a small mound of earth. At either end of it, an empty bottle of blue glass that had once contained poison was fixed into the ground. In one was a withered stalk of Jimson weed. Ben squatted before it, moaning, a slow, inarticulate sound. Still moaning, he thought vaguely about and found a twig and put it in the other bottle. Why don't you hush? Luster said. You want me to give you something to show no mom about? Supposing I do this. He knelt and swept the bottle suddenly up behind him. Ben ceased moaning. He squatted, looking at the small depression where the bottle had sat, and then, as he drew his lungs full, Luster brought the bottle back into view. Hush, he hissed. Don't you dast to Bella, don't you? Dar it is, see? Here, you fixin' to start if you stays here. Come on, let's go see if they started knocking ball yet. He took Ben's arm and drew him up, and they went to the fence and stood side by side there, peering between the matted honeysuckle not yet in bloom. Dar, Luster said. Dar comes some, you see him? They watched the foursome play on to the green and out, and moved to the tee and drive. Ben watched, whimpering, slobbering. When the foursome went on, he followed along the fence, bobbing and moaning. One said, Here, Caddy, bring the bag. Hush, Benji, Luster said. But when Ben went on at his shambling trot, clinging to the fence, wailing in his hoarse, hopeless voice. The man played and went on, Ben keeping pace with him until the fence turned at right angles, and he clung to the fence, watching the people move on and away. Will you hush now? Luster said. Will you hush now? He shook Ben's arm. Ben clung to the fence, wailing steadily and hoarsely. Ain't you going to stop? Luster said. Oh, is you? Ben gazed through the fence. All right, then, Luster said. You want something to bell about? He looked over his shoulder toward the house. Then he whispered, Caddy. Bell it now, Caddy. 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 A moment later, in the slow intervals of Ben's voice, Luster heard Dilsey calling. He took Ben by the arm, and they crossed the yard toward her. I told you weren't going to stay quiet, Luster said. You villain, Dilsey said. What you done to him?
I ain't done nothing. I told you when them folks start playing, he gets started up. You come on here, Dilsey said. Hush, Benji. Hush now. But he wouldn't hush. They crossed the yard quickly and went to the cabin and entered. I'm gonna get that shoe, Dilsey said. Don't you disturb Miss Caroline now. If she say something, tell her I got him. Go on now. You can sure do that right, I reckon. Luster went out. Dilsey led Ben to his bed and drew him down beside her, and she held him, rocking back and forth, wiping his drooling mouth upon the hem of her skirt. Hush now, she said, stroking his head. Hush. Dilsey got you. But he bellowed slowly, abjectly, without tears, the grave, hopeless sound of all voiceless misery under the sun. Luster returned, carrying a white satin slipper. It was yellow now, and cracked and soiled, but when they placed it into Ben's hand, he hushed for a while. But he still whimpered, and soon he lifted his voice again. You reckon you can find TP? Dilsey said. He say yesterday he going out to St. John's today. Say he be back at 4. Dilsey rocked back and forth, stroking Ben's head. This long time of Jesus, she said. This long time. I could drive that Surrey, mammy, Luster said. You'll kill both y'all, Dilsey said. You do it for devilment. I knows you got plenty sense to, but I can't trust you. Hush now, he said. Hush. Hush. No, I won't, Luster said. I drives with TP. Dilsey rocked back and forth, holding Ben. Miss Caroline says if you can't quiet him, she going to get up and come down here and to hit. Hush, honey, Dilsey said, stroking Ben's head. Luster, honey, she said. Will you think about your old mammy and drive that Surrey right? Yes'm, Luster said. I drive it just like TP. Dilsey stroked Ben's head, rocking back and forth. I does the best I can, she said. Lord knows that. Go get it then, she said, rising. Luster scuttled out. Ben held the slipper, crying. Hush now. Luster gonna get you, sir, and then take you to the graveyard. We ain't going to risk getting your cap, she said. She went to a closet contrived of a calico curtain hung across a corner of the room and got the felt hat she had worn. We was down to worse than this, as folks just know, she said. You's the Lord, child, anyway. And I'll be hissing too for long, praise Jesus here. She put the hat on his head and buttoned his coat. He wailed steadily. She took the slipper from him and put it away, and they went out. Luster came up with an ancient white horse and a battered and lopsided surrey. You going to be careful, Luster? She said. Yes'm, Luster said. She helped Ben into the back seat. He had ceased crying, but now he began to whimper again. It's his flower, Luster said. Wait, I'll get him one. You said right there, Dilsey said. She went and took the cheek strap. Now hurry and get him one. Luster ran around the house toward the garden. He came back with a single narcissus. That and broke, Dilsey said. Why you get him a good one? Hit the ugliest one I could find, Luster said. Y'all took all of them on Friday to decorate the church. Wait, I'll fix it. So while Dilsey held the horse, Luster put a splint on the flower stalk with a twig and 2 bits of string and gave it to Ben. Then he mounted and took the reins. Dilsey still held the bridle. You knows the way now, she said. Up the street, round the square, to the graveyard, just straight back home. Yes'm, Luster said. I'm up, Queenie. You gonna be careful now? Yes'm. Dilsey released the bridle. I'm up, Queenie, Luster said. Here, Dilsey said. You hand me that whip. Ah, mammy, Luster said. Give it here. Dilsey said, approaching the wheel. Luster gave it to her reluctantly. I won't never get Queenie started now. Never mind you about that, Dilsey said. Queenie knows more about where she's going than you does. All you got to do is sit there and hold them reins. You knows the way now? Yes. Same way TP goes every Sunday. Then you do the same thing this Sunday. Course I is. Ain't I drove for TP more than 100 times? Then do it again, Dilsey said. Go on now.
And if you hurt Benji, and boy, I don't know what I do. You bound for the chain gang, but I'll send you there for even chain gang ready for you. Yes'm, Lester said. Hum up, Queenie. He flapped the lines on Queenie's broad back, and the surrey lurched into motion. You, Luster, Dilsey said. Hum up, Di, Luster said. He flapped the lines again. With subterranean rumblings, Queenie jogged slowly down the drive and turned into the street, where Luster exhorted her into a gait resembling a prolonged and suspended fall in a forward direction. Ben quit whimpering. He sat in the middle of the seat, holding the repaired flower upright in his fist, his eyes serene and ineffable. Directly before him, Luster's bullet head turned backward continually until the house passed from view, and then he pulled to the side of the street, and while Ben watched him, he descended and broke a switch from a hedge. Queenie lowered her head and felt a crop in the grass until Luster mounted and hauled her head up and harried her into motion again. Then he squared his elbows, and with the switch and the reins held high, he assumed a swaggering attitude out of all proportion to the sedate clopping of Queenie's hooves and the organ-like basso of her internal accompaniment. Motors passed them and pedestrians. Once a group of half-grown Negroes said, "Daw, Luster, where are you going, Luster? To the boneyard?" "Hi," Luster said. "Ain't the same boneyard y'all hated for. Hop up there for pump." They approached the square where the Confederate soldier gazed with empty eyes beneath his marble hand into wind and weather. Luster took still another notch in himself and gave the impervious Queenie a cut with the switch, casting his glance about the square. "Da, Mr. Jason's car," he said. Then he spied another group of Negroes. "Let's show them ins how quality does, Benji," he says. "What you say?" He looked back. Ben sat, holding the flower in his fist, his gaze empty and untroubled. Luster hit Queenie again and swung her to the left at the moment. For an instant, Ben sat in utter hiatus, then he bellowed. Bellow on bellow, his voice mounted with scarce interval for breath. There was more than astonishment in it. It was horror, shock, agony, eyeless, tongueless, just sound, and Luster's eyes back-rolling for a white instant. "Great God," he said. "Hush! Hush! Great God!" He whirled again and struck Queenie with the switch. It broke, and he cast it away, and with Ben's voice mounting towards this unbelievable crescendo, Luster caught up at the end of the reins and leaned forward as Jason came jumping across the square and onto the step. With a backhanded blow, he hurled Luster aside and caught the reins and sawed Queenie about and doubled the reins back and slashed her across the hips. He cut her again and again into a plunging gallop while Ben's hoarse agony roared about them and swung her about to the right of the monument. Then he struck Luster over the head with his fist. "Don't you know any better than to take him to the left?" he said. He reached back and struck Ben, breaking the flower stalk again. "Shut up!" he said. "Shut up!" He jerked Queenie back and jumped down. "Get to hell on home with him. If you ever cross that gate with him again, I'll kill you." "Yes, sir," Luster said. He took the reins and hit Queenie with the end of them. Get up, Doc. Benji, for God's sake." Ben's voice roared and roared. Queenie moved again. Her feet began to clop steadily again, and at once Ben hushed. Luster looked quickly back over his shoulder, and then he drove on. The broken flower drooped over Ben's fist, and his eyes were empty and blue and serene again as cornice and facade flowed smoothly once more from left to right. Post and tree, window and doorway, and sideboard, each in its ordered place. End of The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner.